Have you ever sat in a luxurious room, the polished wooden table gleaming, the leather chairs carrying that faint, earthy scent, yet felt like you were completely invisible, as if everyone in the room could see right through you, like you were nothing more than a shadow I have? And bitterly enough, it happened on the very day of my father's will reading. My name is Evelyn Bennett. I am 42 years old, living in Austin, Texas, and I am a single mother to a 10-year-old boy named Lucas. I used to believe family was a safe harbor, a place where you could always return. But the truth is, in their eyes, I've always been nothing more than a thorn in their side, someone erased from existence long ago. The moment I stepped into that room, my older sister's voice, Karen Bennett, cut through the air like a blade. She's not getting anything. Dad hated her. No greeting, no kindness, just those sharp, deliberate words, loud enough for everyone to hear. The weight of that sentence landed on my chest like a punch. I squeezed Lucas's small hand tighter. He turned to me, worry clouding his little eyes, and his hand trembled slightly. I tried to smile at him, but my lips shook, the smile coming out broken and fragile. In my head, sarcasm bubbled up, right? I'm just a walking bank account with legs, useless once the money runs out. But I didn't say a word. I swallowed it back, like I've done for years. My uncle, Richard Bennett, wasted no time piling on. He leaned back in his chair, arms folded, and muttered just loud enough for me to hear. Even the kid knows his mother's useless. I swear I felt my heart splinter. Lucas stared down at his lap, his small fingers tangled together, his feet swinging above the floor. Seeing my little boy insulted in front of a room full of people made my blood boil. Shame, anger, and humiliation burned through me, but still, I stayed silent. I walked to the farthest chair, the one at the very end of the table. The seat creaked under me, like it could hear how alone I was. Karen glanced my way, her lips curling into a mocking half-smile, her eyes a mix of pity and contempt. Her voice was soft, almost gentle, but every word carried ice. You know, Dad changed the will. To him, you've been dead for a long time. I almost laughed. Dead for a long time. Then why am I sitting here, breathing, fighting every single day to build a decent life for my son inside? A quiet, bitter whisper surfaced I shouldn't have come here. What did I expect? A line with my name on it, a sign that Dad still remembered me, but then I looked at Lucas. He sat there so still, his gaze sweeping across every face at the table, studying them all like he was piecing together a puzzle. There was a strange calmness about him that almost scared me. It had been 8 years since I last set foot in this house. 8 years since I carried Lucas away after my marriage fell apart and my father slammed the door in my face. I left with nothing but my son in my arms and the promise of peace for him. And yet here I was today, sitting under the warm yellow lights, the smoke-stained walls of this room pressing in on me, with every single pair of eyes locked on me, like I was the loser everyone expected me to be. They thought I came here to beg. They thought I would swallow the humiliation in silence and walk out empty-handed. But what they didn't know was that, in that very moment, something inside me awakened, a quiet, furious storm, and Lucas, my 10-year-old son, was holding a secret that could change everything. The question is when that secret comes to light, who will truly be the one erased from the will? The air in the room was thick and stifling, as if every breath was weighed down by the stale smell of old cigarettes and venomous words. I sat at the end of the table, trying to stay composed, but Karen's eyes stayed fixed on me like the tip of a dagger. "You know this is pointless." She enunciated each word, her voice smooth but laced with malice. "Dad cut you out of the will. He said outright that you are no longer part of this family." I lifted my head. Karen's eyes gleamed with triumph. I replied slowly, my voice low but clear. "Strange. I thought Dad would at least leave me a chair in this room instead of inviting me here just to make me the punchline." A mocking laugh slipped out of Richard's throat. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "Stop fooling yourself. Evelyn, Dad knew exactly who you and your sister are. He didn't leave you anything because he knew all you were good at was running away." I took a deep breath. In my head, I heard my father's cold voice from years ago. Blood must stay loyal. The one who walks away is the traitor. After all these years, those words still felt like shackles around my neck. Running away, I laughed, but it was bitter and hollow. "Tell me the truth. Richard, why did you sell my apartment back then to pay off your debts? Or to give Karen the lavish wedding that costs more than a house in the suburbs of Austin?" Karen froze for a split second. But then she straightened her posture, her red lips curving into a smug smile. "You don't understand. That was to save the family's reputation. Dad didn't want to be humiliated by having a daughter go bankrupt. My wedding was just the most convenient excuse." Lucas sat next to me, his wide eyes unblinking. I felt his small hand tremble as it touched mine. My 10-year-old son was hearing every word. A child was absorbing every ounce of this family's venom. I turned to Karen, my voice dropping, heavy as stone. "Interesting. I spent 3 years taking care of Dad when he was sick, staying up all night watching over him, while you were busy flaunting your diamond ring in front of cameras. And now you tell me it was all a sacrifice for the family's reputation. What a joke." Karen bit her lip, her eyes flickering for just a moment. But Richard cut in sharply. "Stop making things up. Dad said it himself. Evelyn, you always play the victim. You have no place in this family anymore. Accept it." Those words hit my ears like a verdict being passed. My throat felt dry, my heart beat erratic. But instead of retreating, I looked straight at them. "Fine. If in your eyes I'm already dead, then why invite me here, or do you just need a corpse sitting quietly to witness your little game of division?" No one replied. Karen pressed her lips tightly together while Richard glanced at Connor, the lawyer. The room fell silent, except for the relentless ticking of the wall clock, each sound sharp as needles piercing skin. In that moment, I knew they hadn't expected me to fight back. They were used to the old Evelyn, the obedient one, the one who bowed her head. But today, I was no longer just a shadow. Lucas looked up at me and whispered softly, "Mom, they don't know." I turned to him, staring into those bright, clear eyes. That incomplete sentence made my heart clench. What did he know that I didn't? And suddenly, it hit me. Maybe in this cruel game, I was not as alone as they thought. But could the words of a 10-year-old really expose the truth in a room full of loud voices and hidden agendas? The room fell silent after my son's words slipped out. Just a short sentence, unfinished. Yet I felt a sharp pain pierce through my chest. "Mom, they don't know." What was Lucas keeping locked inside his heart? I took a deep breath. The smell of old wood, Karen's overpowering perfume, the heavy leather of the chairs, all of it blended into a suffocating scent that pressed against my lungs. I closed my eyes, wondering why I even came here. Why did I throw myself into the trap they had so carefully set? Memories came rushing back. The door slammed shut 8 years ago. My father's voice, sharp and cold. "You are no longer my daughter." I remembered how my hands trembled as I carried 2-year-old Lucas out of that house. I remembered the sleepless nights, holding him close in our cramped apartment, listening to the roar of trucks on the street while my heart felt hollow. Back then, I swore I would never return. And yet, here I was today, sitting in this room, hearing them use those same cruel words again, as if tearing open an old wound. I glanced at Karen and caught the slight curve of her red lips, as if each of my tears was her personal victory. Richard leaned back with his arms crossed, his expression smug. In their minds, I was weak, defeated, someone who would quietly bow her head. Did they really think I would swallow this betrayal with a silent, forced smile? My hand instinctively tightened around Lucas's small palm. He looked up at me, his eyes clear, yet strangely firm. In them, I saw something faith, a quiet, unwavering belief that his mother would not break. I turned away, avoiding Karen's gaze. Inside, a voice whispered, "Evelyn, if you stay silent today, they will bury you alive for the rest of your life." Last night, I couldn't sleep. I lay on my old bed, staring at the ceiling as tears soaked into my pillow. In my dreams, I saw my father not the stern, cold man he became, but the one from long ago, walking me along the shores of Lake Buchanan, smiling softly when I fell in the sand. I woke up with a weight on my chest, wondering if he ever regretted anything. But now, in this room, I finally understood whether he regretted it or not. Didn't matter anymore. I could no longer let my life be ruled by their contemptuous stares. I had endured enough. Leaning forward slightly, I spoke, my voice calm but sharp. "You say I'm dead in my father's eyes. Then let me remind you, dead people don't rise. But I'm sitting right here, alive, and stronger than you think." Karen narrowed her eyes, but didn't have time to respond. For the first time, I lifted my head, meeting their gaze without flinching. In that moment, I knew I had crossed an invisible line. Inside me, the fury no longer burned like wildfire. It had transformed into something colder, sharper, a blade forged by years of pain. I whispered to myself, if they forged my signature to start this war, then this time, I will be the one to finish it. I felt my heart beat slow, no longer frantic. A strange calm washed over me. The pain and the humiliation were gone, replaced by resolve. Lucas squeezed my hand gently, like a silent promise. And in that moment, I realized I wasn't just fighting for myself, but for him, for the boy who deserved to grow up without shame. And I made a silent vow from this moment on. The rules of the game had changed. But deep down, one question echoed in my mind. Would my determination be enough to stand against an entire family built on manipulation and lies? I leaned back in my chair, my eyes scanning the room. Karen sat upright, chin tilted high, her gaze dripping with arrogance. Richard kept his arms crossed, breathing sharply through his teeth as if he was waiting for me to crumble. But I didn't crumble. On the contrary, a truth I had buried in my throat for so long was demanding to be spoken. "I have a question," I said, my voice calm but clear. During the years when Dad was gravely ill, who was the one paying the hospital bills every month? Karen froze. Richard frowned. No one answered. Let me make it clear. I continued, my voice growing firmer. $2,800 every single month. I transferred it regularly, not a single day late, for 3 straight years. In addition, Richard left behind his credit card debt after his failed business. Add the brand new car I bought for Karen so she could drive to the hospital and pretend to be the devoted daughter. Tell me, who paid for all of that? The atmosphere in the room shifted. A few relatives sat silently, their eyes darting around in confusion. I heard the faint creak of a chair as Karen shifted, her hand tightening around her glass of water. I don't remember that, Karen stammered. Of course you don't, I said, tilting my head, a bitter smile tugging at my lips. It's easy to forget the bills you never paid, but I remember. Because every single invoice was another sleepless night for me, sitting at my computer, watching my son fall asleep at the kitchen table, praying my bank account wouldn't slip into the negative. Lucas sat next to me, his eyes wide, as if hearing this story for the first time. I had never told my son about the brutal numbers behind it all. To him, he just saw his mom working endlessly. But the truth was, there were days when I had to choose between buying groceries for the 2 of us or covering another chunk of the hospital bills. Richard let out a harsh, mocking laugh, trying to regain control. No one forced you to do it. You chose to, so don't come here looking for credit. I snapped my head toward him, my voice sharp. Choose to. If I hadn't done it, Dad wouldn't have received proper care. Where were you then? Karen was busy posing for bridal photos. You were busy sitting at the bar. I was there, paying, cleaning up, staying up through the night. And what did I get in return? A forged signature to sell my apartment and a declaration that I was dead to the family. The last word slammed into the room like a hammer striking steel. Karen's face turned pale. Richard swallowed hard but said nothing. I felt a hollow ache mixed with a strange sense of relief. After years of being branded as the runaway, I had finally laid bare the truth they wanted to bury. I wasn't the daughter who abandoned her family. I was the one holding this family up so they could keep wearing their mask of righteousness. Lucas placed his small hand over mine, whispering softly, "Mom, I'm proud of you." My heart clenched, tears stinging my eyes. But this time, they weren't from shame. It was relief. Karen pressed her lips together and turned to Attorney Connor. "Do you really have to record all this nonsense?" Connor adjusted his glasses, his voice steady and firm. "Miss Bennett, this isn't nonsense. This is sworn testimony in front of multiple witnesses, and I'd advise you to stay silent, because I have every transfer receipt on file." The air in the room grew heavy. Karen's breathing quickened. Richard glanced around, searching for allies. I knew the real battle was only beginning, but at least, this time, the truth had finally spoken. And deep down, one question burned inside me. How would they strike back now that they were cornered? Karen tried to swallow her anger, and Richard looked uneasy, but I knew they wouldn't stop. With people who survive on tricks and manipulation, the moment the truth gets exposed, they only get more aggressive. And this time, I wouldn't sit back and wait to be blindsided. I took a deep breath, a cold determination rising inside me. They started this war when they forged my signature, so I would finish what they began. "Mr. Connor," I said firmly, my voice steady, I'd like to request a full review of the condo transfer documents from 8 years ago. That signature is not mine, and I believe the court will agree to have it authenticated." Connor nodded, a flicker of admiration in his eyes. "I still have the original files in the archives. If you want, we can file a lawsuit as soon as the will reading concludes." Karen shot up from her chair, her voice shrill and sharp. "She's lying. Everyone here knows Evelyn walked away from the house. Nobody forced her to do anything. I lifted my head and locked eyes with my sister. Walked away. Yes, I did. But I walked away to escape being used, not to give you free rein to sell me out. If you want to prove I'm wrong, Karen, let's settle it in court." Karen went silent. Richard cleared his throat but didn't dare intervene. Inside me, fear slowly transformed into an indescribable strength. I remembered all those long, quiet nights gathering receipts and saving every email confirming each transfer. There were times I thought I was foolish for helping people who had already turned their backs on me. But now, those very records would become my weapon. Lucas tilted his head and whispered softly, "Mom, you're going to win, right?" I rested my hand on his soft hair and smiled. "We don't need to beat anyone, sweetheart. We just need to take back what's rightfully ours." I knew I needed allies, and I had one. Back when I worked at the bank, I kept in touch with an old friend, a financial attorney named Michael Torres. He once warned me that the condo sale documents looked suspicious. I ignored him then because I didn't want to start a fight, but now, things were different. I would call him tonight. I'd also kept the bank statements and the automatic transfer notifications sent to my phone. Every dry number, every confirmation line, they was living proof. Karen looked at me, her lips trembling, maybe for the first time. She realized I was no longer the Evelyn she could push into a corner. "You've been so used to seeing me as the obedient shadow in the background," I said slowly, my tone cutting and deliberate. "But starting today, I won't stay silent anymore. You chose this war. I'm simply fighting back." The atmosphere in the room shifted completely. A few relatives lowered their heads, avoiding my gaze. Connor scribbled notes quickly, his expression more serious than ever. I knew this battle wouldn't be easy. There would be long, exhausting days, heated arguments in court, and whispers from judgmental relatives. But at least this time, I was walking into it with my eyes wide open and my head held high. Lucas sat beside me, holding my hand, and whispered softly, "Mom, I believe in you." And somehow, those 4 words were enough to remind me that I wasn't alone. But deep down, I couldn't help wondering when my counterattack begins. Just how far will Karen and Richard fall? The next morning, I sat in my small kitchen in Austin, holding a steaming cup of black coffee. Lucas was hunched over his desk, rehearsing his history presentation in a soft whisper. Outside, the Texas sunlight spilled across the red rooftops. It was oddly peaceful, but my phone wouldn't stop vibrating. Message after message flooded in. The family group chat, which had been silent for years, suddenly exploded. Karen was typing nonstop, her words punctuated with bright red exclamation marks. "You can't make false accusations. You'll pay the price if you dare to sue." Right after her came Richard, his message in all caps, "Evelyn, who do you think you are?" I took a sip of coffee and hid a faint smile. The party had just begun. At that moment, my phone rang. "Connor." I picked up his voice, deep and composed. "Mrs. Bennett. I've reviewed the files. The apartment sale contract indeed has a forged signature. This case is solid enough to file a lawsuit immediately. I closed my eyes as a wave of heat rushed down my spine. It wasn't fear, it was vindication. Thank you. Connor, I'll let Attorney Torres take it from here. That afternoon, Karen called me directly. I glanced at the screen. My hand trembled slightly, but I answered anyway. Evelyn. Her voice was shrill, laced with fury. You're tearing this family apart after all these years away. You come back just to cause chaos. I let out a soft laugh. Tearing it apart, if I recall correctly. You're the ones who forged my signature to sell the apartment. I'm simply taking back what's rightfully mine. There were a few seconds of silence on the other end before Karen's voice dropped into a low, threatening tone. You won't win this. We won't let you drag the entire family through the mud. My reply came cold and sharp. Families don't betray one another. If there's mud, it's the pit you dug yourselves. I hung up. My heart raced, but the corner of my lips curved slightly. Later that evening, I received a call from Michael Torres. His voice was steady and precise. Evelyn, I've reviewed the preliminary files Connor sent over. There are several irregularities. The signing date doesn't match the notarization date, and the account receiving the funds doesn't belong to your father. Someone clearly siphoned the money. I stayed silent for a few seconds, my fingers tapping lightly on the table. In my mind, the puzzle pieces began clicking into place. The truth, buried for so long, was finally starting to surface. Lucas came out of his study room holding a thick book, settling next to me on the couch. Mom, why are you smiling to yourself? I placed a gentle hand on his shoulder and whispered, because I'm watching people who thought they were untouchable finally start to tremble. Lucas tilted his head, his bright eyes fixed on me. They're going to lose, aren't they? I didn't answer right away. I took another sip of my now cold coffee, listening to the steady rhythm of my heartbeat. This was only the beginning. But one question lingered in my mind when the accounts are frozen and the truth explodes in court. What will Karen and Richard do to cling to the last scraps of their power? The news came faster than I expected. On Monday morning, just as I was leaving the house to take Lucas to school, my phone buzzed. It was Michael Torres calling. Evelyn. His voice was calm but urgent. The judge has signed the temporary order. All accounts related to the Bennett estate have been frozen until the investigation is complete. And the contract for the apartment sale 8 years ago has officially been voided. I froze right there on the sidewalk. The Texas sun was blazing down, but a chill ran straight through me. Frozen accounts. Contract voided. I could barely believe the words echoing in my ears. Are you sure? I asked again. Absolutely. This is an emergency court order. And Evelyn. Michael lowered his voice. Karen and Richard are going to lose their minds over this. And just as he said, barely an hour later, my phone exploded with notifications. Messages piled up. Missed calls kept coming in nonstop. Karen screamed into the voicemail, "What did you do? My daughter's wedding money, my husband's investments, and everything else are locked up. You have no right." I sat in the car, watching Lucas wave happily at the school gate, and suddenly, my heart went quiet. No right, I had stayed silent long enough. Now, justice was speaking for me. That afternoon, Richard called. Gone was his usual arrogant tone. What came through was a furious roar. How dare you humiliate me like this? Half my business deals are on the brink because of this damn freeze, Evelyn. You have no idea who you just went to war with." I exhaled slowly and replied, steady and calm, "I'm not the one who started this war. Richard, you forged my signature. That's when it began. I'm just finishing what you started." There was a brief silence on the line before he hung up with a loud slam. That evening, I sat in our small living room under the soft yellow light while Lucas worked on his homework beside me. I unlocked my phone and scrolled through the chaos of messages in the family group chat. A new message from Karen popped up, clear as day. "Everything is falling apart. If you have any shred of decency left, stop this now." I laughed out loud, startling Lucas, who looked up at me, puzzled. "Mom, what's so funny?" I brushed his hair gently and whispered, "They call the truth falling apart, sweetheart. But to me, this is just the beginning." Inside me, there was no fear left, only a quiet, burning satisfaction. 8 years of being belittled, dismissed, and pushed aside, and now a single legal decision had sent cracks through their entire wall of power. But I also knew one thing for certain: when greed and money are blocked, people like them never sit still. And one question haunted me through the night. What would Karen and Richard do next? Beg, accuse, or plot revenge? My phone rang in the middle of the night. The shrill sound shattered the rare silence Lucas and I had finally managed to find. I looked at the screen. "Karen?" I hesitated for a few seconds, then picked up. "Evelyn." Her voice trembled, breaking mid-sentence. "You can't do this to me. You know, my daughter's college tuition. It's in the account that just got frozen. I'm begging you, please, stop this." I closed my eyes, my heart unsettled. This was Karen, the same woman who once stood before the entire family and declared that I had been dead to her for years. And now she was pleading with me. A part of me ached, but another part hardened. "Karen," I replied, my voice low and steady. "I've survived the last 8 years without a single cent from this family. I took care of Dad. I took care of you all, down to my very last dollar. But did you ever once think about me and Lucas?" She stayed silent. I could hear her ragged breathing on the other end. Then Karen broke down, crying, but I no longer felt the same softness I once had. Less than an hour later, Richard called. There was no begging this time, only a venomous growl. "Evelyn, are you trying to destroy this entire family? You're dragging your father's name through the mud. Even after he's dead, you're selfish, petty, and hell-bent on revenge." I bit my lip, keeping my tone calm and composed. "No, Richard, I just want the truth to be acknowledged. Dad's name was tainted long before I ever said a word, not because of me, but because of the people who turned this family into a marketplace for vanity and status. I'm just cleaning up the mess you all left behind." There was silence on the other end, only heavy, uneven breaths. Then the line went dead. I sat still for a long moment, listening to the rhythm of my heartbeat matching the ticking of the clock on the wall. My emotions tangled together: pity, anger, and an unexpected sense of relief. The pleas, the accusations, they all proved one thing: their masks were finally cracking. Lucas came out of his room, rubbing his eyes, whispering softly, "Mom, why aren't you asleep?" I pulled him close, holding him tightly. "Because, sweetheart, I'm watching the very people who once brought me down finally bow their heads. Inside me, the storm had quieted, but I knew the bigger waves were still ahead. Once the truth had been set free, there was no going back for any of us. If you've listened this far and felt the coldness, bitterness, and strange sense of liberation in my story, I want to hear from you. Have you ever been betrayed by your own family? Would you choose forgiveness? Or would you walk away for good? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want to keep walking alongside real, raw, and powerful stories about betrayal and rebirth, don't forget to subscribe to Bitter Scars. Every share from you helps bring forgotten voices back into the light. On the day of the family meeting at Attorney Connor's office, the Austin sky was thick and gray, as if warning of an approaching storm. I arrived early, clutching a stack of documents in my hands, evidence of the long years I had silently provided support. The hospital bills, the bank statements, and even the notarized confirmation of a forged signature. When I walked in, every gaze turned toward me. Karen sat with her arms crossed, her face stiff but struggling to project confidence. Richard's face was flushed red, looking as though he was ready to explode at any moment. Connor began in his steady, measured voice. Before we dive into the distribution of the estate, there is a document that needs to be disclosed. Mrs. Evelyn Bennett has provided evidence showing that her apartment was sold through a forged signature. Additionally, all of Mr. Charles' medical expenses during the last 3 years of his life were solely covered by her. The entire room rippled with shock. Some relatives leaned toward one another, whispering. I saw Karen's face turn pale while Richard gripped the armrest so tightly his knuckles went white. I rose to my feet, my voice ringing with unwavering clarity. For the past 8 years, I've been called the runaway, the daughter who was long dead. But here is the truth: I carried our father through his illness, while you bragged and spent. I refuse to stay invisible any longer. Consider this my resignation letter from being this family's silent benefactor. The air seemed to shatter. I heard sharp gasps, the scraping of chairs. Karen shot up, her voice cracking. You're lying. You're just doing this to get sympathy. Connor adjusted his glasses and held up a stack of papers. Everything here is supported by evidence. Bank transfers, notarized confirmations, and even testimony from the public notary. This isn't speculation. This is a legal fact. Richard tried to salvage the moment. Every family has misunderstandings. Why do you have to expose everything in front of outsiders? I looked straight at him, a cold smile flickering on my lips, because silence was what killed me. Today, I choose to speak. Lucas sat quietly in the corner, his eyes shining as he witnessed everything. I knew, in that moment, he was learning an important lesson: the truth never needs to hide. Karen turned away, her shoulders trembling. Richard clenched his jaw so tight his teeth nearly cracked. And me? I stood tall, feeling lighter than I had in years. But deep down, I understood something else after this direct confrontation. The already fractured bonds between us could never be mended. The only question echoing in my mind was this: would this family survive now that the final mask had been ripped away? The conference room sank into silence after I finished speaking. Only the low hum of the air conditioner remained, blending with Karen's ragged breathing. She stood frozen for a few seconds before turning to me, her eyes red and glistening. Do you even realize what you've just done? Evelyn, you've shattered what's left of this so-called family. I looked straight at my younger sister, my voice lowering. No, Karen. This family has been broken for a long time. I only peeled back the glossy paint hiding all the cracks. Richard slammed his hand on the table, sending several folders flying open. He roared, "What more do you want, money? The house. Or do you just want to see us humiliated in front of the whole family?" I replied calmly. "I want the truth, and I want my son to know that his mother is not the coward you've painted her to be." An older relative shook his head and sighed softly. The expressions around the room slowly shifted from indifference to suspicion, from suspicion to a quiet distancing from Karen and Richard. I caught Lucas staring at me, his bright eyes shining with pride. That look was the only answer I needed. Karen trembled as she gathered her bag, her voice breaking. I can't stay here and listen to this anymore." She walked quickly out of the room, her heels clacking sharply against the floor. Her husband hurried after her, his face flushed crimson, muttering curses under his breath. Richard remained seated, his fists clenched tightly, his gaze vacant. Finally, he forced out a hoarse, short sentence. "This family is over." He stood, walked out, and never looked back. The space left behind felt hollow. I could hear my own heartbeat steady and strong. Yet inside, there was a quiet emptiness I couldn't explain. I had lost my family in the blood sense, but at the same time, I had freed myself from the shackles that had bound me for the past 8 years. Connor tapped his pen lightly against the table, his voice measured and calm. "There are some relationships that can't be mended, but at least now, the truth is out." I nodded slowly. Yes. No more fake dinners, no more cold hugs, no more watchful, judging eyes. All of it had turned to dust. On the drive home, Lucas sat in the back seat and suddenly asked, "Mom, does this mean we don't have a family anymore?" I stayed quiet for a moment, then glanced at him through the rearview mirror. "We still have a family, Lucas. It's just smaller now, but it's real." He smiled softly, leaning his head against the window, his eyelids gently closing in peaceful silence. I gripped the steering wheel tighter. Inside me, a deep sadness blended with an overwhelming sense of release. The old family had collapsed, but from its ruins, a new journey was beginning. And one question still echoed in my mind when I finally faced those who once declared me dead. Will I have the strength to walk away and say my final goodbye? I thought that after the day the truth came out, Karen and Richard would stay quiet and keep to themselves. But I was wrong. That afternoon, just as I stepped out of the attorney's office, Richard's black car blocked my path. Karen got out first, her makeup smudged, her eyes bloodshot. Richard followed behind her, his shoulders tense with barely restrained anger. Evelyn Karen screamed, her voice cracking. "You must be so proud of yourself." "Huh, you've destroyed everything." I stood still, taking a deep breath. Lucas clutched my hand tightly, his worried eyes searching my face. I gave him a small gesture to step back, then turned to face them. "No, Karen," I said calmly, my voice steady. "You two destroyed everything yourselves. I just spoke the truth." Richard lunged forward, pointing his finger straight at my face. "You always want to be the victim, but the truth is, you're selfish. You walked away when Dad needed you the most. You came back just to get revenge." I laughed, sharp and cold. Selfish. If I were selfish, I wouldn't have sent every single payment for Dad's hospital bills, nor would I have broken my back to pay off your debts. I walked away because I refused to let my son grow up in a house full of lies. That was the decision of a mother, not a coward. Karen burst into tears, her voice breaking. You don't understand. Dad needed someone by his side. I did everything I could. I looked at my sister, speaking slowly, each word cutting through her delusion like a blade. You weren't by his side out of love, Karen. You were there for recognition, for validation, for the image you could show off to others. Real love sometimes doesn't need to be seen at all. And Dad knew that, even if it came too late. Richard fell silent, his eyes shifting uneasily. Karen staggered back a little, her hand covering her face. I drew a deep breath, my voice clear and unshakable. I'm done pretending that we're a loving family. I've endured enough insults, enough condescending looks. This will be the last time we ever stand face to face as sisters. From now on, I no longer belong to what you call the Bennett family. The air grew heavy and thick around us. A few steps away, I saw Lucas standing there, his wide eyes glimmering as if he knew this was a moment he would never forget. Karen lifted her tear-streaked face, her lips trembling. So, you're really choosing to walk away? I shook my head gently. No, I'm not walking away. I'm choosing freedom. I turned around, held Lucas's hand tightly, and walked away without looking back. Behind me, I could still hear Karen's sobs and Richard's curses, but they all seemed to fade into nothing, swallowed by the distance. Inside me, pain and anger intertwined, then melted into one solid resolve I would never return. But as I walked away, I knew the hardest part was yet to come. I could cut all ties with them, but was I strong enough to keep living without ever needing their acknowledgement that night? The small apartment in Austin was wrapped in silence. No more screaming phone calls, no more relentless messages stabbing straight into my heart, only the ticking of the clock, the faint whistle of the wind outside the balcony, and the gentle scent of chamomile tea filled the living room. I sat down on the sofa, both hands wrapped around the steaming ceramic cup. My heart was still pounding from the confrontation earlier that afternoon, but the chaotic rhythm of fear was no longer there. In its place was a quiet calm, something I hadn't felt in such a long time, peace. Lucas came over with a thin blanket draped around his shoulders and sat down beside me. His eyes were still bright, as if he understood better than anyone else the meaning of what had happened today. "Mom," he whispered, so softly I had to lean closer to hear him. "You were amazing today. I've never seen you this strong." I froze for a moment. For so many years, I had only seen myself as a woman struggling to keep it together, fumbling through bills, surviving gossip, enduring condescending stares. Yet in my son's eyes, I was unshakable. At that moment, I understood my worth wasn't measured by inheritance or recognition from blood relatives, but by this boy's unwavering trust in me. I set the cup down on the table, pulled Lucas into my arms, and spoke, my voice trembling yet firm. "Sweetheart, from now on, I won't live to please anyone else. Not Karen, not Richard, not even the shadow of your grandfather. All I need to do is be the best mom I can be for you, and that's enough." Lucas smiled and rested his head on my shoulder. I listened to the steady rhythm of his breathing, an unspoken promise that we would be okay, no matter what storms raged outside. The next morning, I woke up early. Sunlight slipped through the curtains, landing on the stack of papers on the table. Hospital bills, bank statements, each number I once clung to like a lifeline to prove my sacrifices. I touched them gently, then stacked them neatly. I still needed them for court, but they were no longer the burden weighing me down. I opened the window, letting the sunlight and breeze pour in. For the first time in forever, I allowed myself to take a deep breath, inhaling the earthy scent of damp wood and the leaves outside. I started tidying up the kitchen, planted a new pot of flowers, then baked Lucas's favorite cake. Small, ordinary things, but somehow they made me feel like I was reclaiming control over my life. By evening, the two of us sat on the balcony, watching the sky painted in fiery reds and oranges. Lucas rested his chin on his knees and asked softly, "Mom, so, is it just the two of us now?" I brushed his hair back and smiled gently. "We may have fewer people, sweetheart, but we're more real now, and that's enough." In that quiet moment, I realized something. I no longer needed validation from those who turned their backs on me. I was enough. I was strong enough, worthy enough, valuable enough, simply because I was still standing after everything. Yet deep down, another thought stirred within me. Could my story become a small light, guiding those who have also been betrayed by their own family a week later? I received a handwritten letter. In this era of emails and instant messages, something like that had almost disappeared. On the envelope, there was only a simple line, "To Mrs. Evelyn Bennett." The handwriting was shaky and delicate. I opened it, and inside were just a few short lines. "I heard about your story through a mutual friend. I, too, was betrayed by my own family over an inheritance dispute. They called me useless, said I wasn't worthy. But when I saw you stand up for yourself, I suddenly felt like maybe I could too. Thank you for not staying silent." I held the letter, my throat tightening. I had never thought that defending myself could become a source of light for someone else. For so many years, I had seen myself as nothing more than a faint shadow in that old house. And yet now, the truth I dared to speak out loud had become an echo for someone else to find their strength. That afternoon, when I went to pick up Lucas, a middle-aged woman approached me. She wore a supermarket uniform, her hands still dusty from handling cartons. She smiled faintly and spoke softly. "Evelyn, I know you through Connor. I just wanted to say, you are very brave. We need more people like you to remind us that no one has to accept injustice just because it comes from family." I was taken aback but managed to return her smile. When she walked away, my heart trembled, not out of fear, but because I realized something. I had crossed into new territory. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for everyone who was silently enduring the same pain. That evening, I sat down and began writing my story, every detail, every hidden corner. I wasn't a writer, nor a public speaker, but I wanted the truth to be told in my own voice. Lucas sat next to me, curious, reading a few lines over my shoulder. He smiled and said, "Mom, you might help more people than you think." I gently ran my fingers through his soft hair. He was right. I used to feel guilty, thinking I had abandoned my father, abandoned my family. But now, I understood telling the truth wasn't abandonment. It was refusing to stay a victim any longer. A week later, I was invited to share my story at a small community gathering. It was just a simple meeting room, about 30 people, but their eyes were fixed on me, bright and intense. Some were divorced women, others were men betrayed by their own siblings. They listened closely, nodding, some even crying quietly. When I ended with the words, "We are not invisible," The truth may take time, but when it comes, it will set us free." The entire room erupted in applause. I saw Lucas's eyes glisten with pride. My son, only 10 years old, was witnessing his mother transform from someone humiliated into someone capable of inspiring others. But that pride was only half of the story. Deep down, I knew Karen and Richard weren't done. People like them never walk away when their power and reputation are on the line. And then, a message from Connor appeared on my phone. "Evelyn, the court has set the preliminary hearing date. Prepare yourself." I gripped the phone tightly, my breath catching. The legal battle was about to enter its most intense stage. Would justice stand by my side one more time? On the day of the trial, the sky over Austin was covered with gray clouds. I held Lucas's hand as we walked up the courthouse steps, my heart trembling yet resolute. In front of me, the heavy wooden doors stood like a symbol of the 8 years of oppression, finally about to burst open. Karen appeared with her husband, her face pale beneath layers of thick makeup. Richard followed behind, his wrinkled suit and bloodshot eyes making him look nothing like the arrogant man he used to be. They no longer carried themselves with the confidence I once knew. Now, they looked like people clinging desperately to fading hope. Inside the courtroom, everything gleamed under the fluorescent lights. The sound of shoes clicking on the tiled floor mixed with the rustling of documents. I sat down at the plaintiff's table as Michael Torres placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder and gave me a small nod. The judge, a gray-haired woman with stern, piercing eyes, entered. The entire room rose to its feet. I could hear the pounding of my own heart. The trial began. Michael spoke briefly but sharply forged signatures, suspicious notarized documents, money transfers into unknown accounts. He presented each piece of evidence, every bank statement, making the entire courtroom fall into a tense, suffocating silence. When Connor took the stand and confirmed that all the archived documents from his office matched exactly with Michael's statements, I saw Karen's shoulders tremble. Richard pressed his lips tightly together, sweat forming on his forehead. Then it was my turn. Michael gave me a small gesture, and I walked up to the stand, gripping the microphone. My voice echoed across the room, steady and deliberate. I didn't come here for revenge. I came here to prove that the truth matters more than lies. During the last 3 years of my father's life, I carried all his medical bills and debts by myself. While my sister and my uncle profited from his suffering, I am not asking for gratitude. I only want my dignity and my legal rights restored. There was a moment of stillness. I caught Lucas's gaze from the audience, his small face watching me with a pride I had never seen before, as if I stood taller than ever. The judge struck her gavel 3 times, her voice calm but commanding. After reviewing the evidence and testimonies, the court declares the property transfer contract from 8 years ago invalid. The assets will be returned to Mrs. Evelyn Bennett. The falsified debts associated with this matter will be forwarded for criminal investigation. This court is adjourned. In that instant, the room erupted. I heard chairs scraping, whispers rippling through the audience. Karen lowered her head, her mascara smearing into dark streaks on her cheeks. Richard slammed his fist on the table but didn't dare say a word. I stood frozen. It wasn't exactly joy that filled me, but a crushing weight finally lifting off my chest. Years of endurance, countless sleepless nights, had finally reached their end. Lucas ran into my arms, hugging me tightly and whispering I knew it. "Mom, I knew you'd win." I smiled through my tears. At that moment, I knew I had reclaimed not just the property but also the respect that had been stolen from me. But as I stepped out of the courthouse, descending the cold stone steps, one thought lingered in my mind. Was this victory the end, or the beginning of something new? The morning after the trial, I opened the window of my small apartment, letting the early sunlight and breeze pour in. No more threatening messages, no more relentless calls, just birdsong mixed with the distant sound of a bus bell. The world kept moving as usual, but for me, everything had changed. 8 years of carrying the weight, 8 years of enduring it all, and finally, I had stepped out of the shadow of the past. I didn't just reclaim my property, I reclaimed my voice. Most importantly, Lucas saw that his mother was no longer a victim. She was someone who knew how to stand up for herself. I drove Lucas to school before running into his classroom. He turned around with a bright smile and said, "Mom, you look so free today." I froze for a moment, surprised by how he put it. Free. Yes, that was the word I never thought would one day belong to me. That afternoon, I drove past the old house where I had once been thrown out in humiliation. The iron gate was still there, its paint peeling. I stopped for a few seconds, looking in, but my chest no longer tightened the way it used to. All that was left was a quiet emptiness, a light relief. I whispered, "Some bridges have to be burned to save yourself." Then I started the car and drove away, for the last time. That evening, Lucas and I cooked together. We turned on some music, laughing as we worked in the kitchen. It wasn't a fancy dinner, just simple spaghetti and a small cake. But I had never felt a meal so warm. In those ordinary moments, I realized this is the true inheritance I want to protect. Later, I sat down and wrote a few lines just for myself. I don't need validation from those who betrayed me. I am enough in the love I give my son and in the strength I've found within myself. The days ahead won't always be bright. There will be more hardships, more challenges. But I know that this time, I have a foundation: confidence, truth, and Lucas's trust. When I turned off the lights and held my son in my arms, I could hear my heartbeat slowing, calm and steady. An old chapter had closed, a new one had begun, and I, Evelyn Bennett, finally felt like I was truly living. If you've stayed with me until now and this story has touched you, tell me, have you ever had to let go of a family in order to find yourself again? Would you choose forgiveness? Or would you choose to walk away? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your words might be the encouragement someone else out there needs. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, please share this video and subscribe to Bitter Scars. Every follow, every comment from you isn't just for me, but for everyone searching for the strength to rise again. Because sometimes, one story is enough to light up an entire life.